Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this incredible setting. I don't know about you, but last night we had the twists and turns of the coach bus, which delivered us at last, and then the twists and turns of the golf cart, and then waking up this morning to this incredible setting. What a joy! It's great to come out of the terrific forum in Athens and to be here on the coast. We are thrilled to be joined this morning by Elif Shafak. She is a best-selling British-Turkish novelist. She's published 19 books, 12 of which are novels, including her latest novel, The Island of Missing Trees. And as many of you know, her 2019 novel, 10 minutes, 38 seconds in this strange world, was shortlisted for the Booker Prize. Elif holds a PhD in political science, and she has taught at various universities in Turkey, the US, and the UK, including St. Anne's College at Oxford University, where she's an honorary fellow. For the purposes of this conversation this morning, Elif also wrote in the summer of 2020, How to Stay Sane in the Age of Division, which is something that I think many, if not all of us, have thought about from time to time over the last few years, especially if you spend any time on social media. Although for many of us covering politics, there was certainly a change in January of 2021 when Donald Trump was removed from Twitter, and my first early morning check-ins on Twitter suddenly got a lot more sane every morning. Elif, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I wish I could be there in person, but I'm very happy that we're having this conversation together.
Very much so too. Could you share with us, Elif, just to start, a few of the lessons from your book last year in terms of how to stay sane in the age of division? Talk a little bit about what you particularly wanted to say in that piece.
Thank you. You know, at the very beginning of the pandemic, I was in London, and I remember seeing speaking of social media, some tweets by publishers with good intentions saying that this lockdown, as you know, we've had several lockdowns in the UK, that it wouldn't be a big difference for authors, for novelists in particular, because novelists are used to working from home. They don't do teamwork, they don't do office work. You know, they're solitary creatures, and therefore it's not going to affect writers as much as it would affect other people. And my experience wasn't like that at all. I think writers are not disconnected from the world. And when so much is happening outside the window, when people are dying in their thousands, when there's so many inequalities, so much injustice, of course it affects all of us. So I found myself, I was working on something completely different, but I found myself struggling, because you ask yourself, is this the book that I should be writing at this moment in time? Does it really matter if I find the perfect synonym, if I find that comma from this sentence to the next line? You know, you ask yourself those kind of existential questions, like many of us have been struggling. I have been struggling with anxiety, uncertainty, anger, this sense of frustration that things are not going forward, just the opposite, we're sliding backwards. So it was a time when I had to stop and try to understand what kind of emotions I was dealing with. And two things I think started the little manifesto in the UK. In several parts, they placed these signs asking, when all this is over, what kind of a world would you like to live in? And people would write their answers, just anonymous, in different colored pens. And someone had scribbled, when all this is over, I would like to live in a world where I'm heard, where I can be heard. And that really stayed with me, because I find it very interesting that at a time when we were promised that we were all going to have a bigger voice, thanks to the proliferation of digital technologies, I think East and West, so many people feel voiceless. So that kind of started the manifesto. There is this beautiful saying by Doris Lessing in one of her essays. She says, literature is analysis after the event. Things happen, you need some time to pass, you need to digest, absorb, and then in retrospect you write. I understand that and I respect that, but I think we've entered an era in which literature also has to become analysis during the event, whilst things are happening. So this little booklet was in a way my attempt to try to understand this particular moment in time.
That's wonderful. I was struck by several things you just said, but one was about how you were working on another project and you decided to stop and think and reflect on the moment and decide that this was a moment to pivot. It reminds me a little bit of the recent speech at the Emmy Awards by Michaela Cole, the British writer and actress, when she accepted the Emmy for I May Want to Destroy You, in which she talked about the need sometime in the society where we feel like we need to be going and going and going and going and being public all the time, to sometimes disappear and to take a moment to stop and reflect and focus on and really bear down on something important, because so much of the for lack of a better word, the insanity comes about sometimes from the need from everyone to feel the need to weigh in constantly on social media, to be talking and thinking and feeling and expressing those views so intensely, and it can really get overwhelming. And I wonder, as you just look back over so much of the conversation that we see now on social media, how do you stay sane in relation to it? Because there is not so much reflection of ideas, but sometimes debate and arguing that can sometimes get fact-free, can go off the rails even.
Absolutely. You know, I think I see the social media like the moon. It does have a bright side, but it also has a dark side that is not visible at first glance. And because we have not focused on its dark side for so long, and because we have over romanticized its bright side, I think we urgently need to understand that dark side. We need to talk about tech monopolies. I don't like concentration of power. I don't think anyone in this world should have extreme power. No politician, no political party, no, corporation, and no tech monopoly. But I also think we had this extreme optimism about information, or we had extreme optimism in general. You will remember late 1990s, early 2000s was a time when people thought, many people, both in media and academia and everywhere actually, we thought that it was the triumph of liberal democracy. The Soviet Union was no more, the Berlin Wall had come down. So from now on, it could only be way forward. And thanks to, again, digital technologies, thanks to Facebook, thanks to Twitter, thanks to the spread of information, basically, people were going to catch up on, the journey of democracy, even those countries that were lagging behind. So this expectation that history could only be linear and progressive, and the arc of history can only bend towards justice, which is beautiful formulation, but it doesn't correspond to reality.
Especially Leif, when there's so many bad faith actors involved in the conversation who can harness that sort of in a way democratization of social media and twist it with misinformation or with misleading information.
Absolutely. And I also remember, back then, this was the very beginning of Arab Spring. There was so much faith in social
Yes.
media that a young couple in Egypt, they named their newborn baby Facebook. And 6 months later, a family in Israel, they named their third child Like. So fast forward, I think about those kids who are teenagers now, Facebook in Egypt and Like in Israel. What kind of a world did we give them? Because I think we have swung, the pendulum has swung, and from the age of optimism, we have entered the age of pessimism. And right now it's a moment of angst, almost like an existential angst. There's a lot of anger, frustration, but we do need to talk about the slander, hate speech, misinformation. As you said, there was a UN report recently that shows, especially for women, politicians, journalists, writers, women in the public space, the amount of abuse that they receive has escalated throughout the pandemic. So there's a lot that we need to be aware of when we talk about social media.
It's so significant. The abuse of women in particular online is so intense. And Elif, I'm wondering, in terms of that, just sort of noise machine that's out there and the abuse that comes up. how do you bring sanity into that system? Because as you've written about, there's a real danger in so-called elites or people who have usually had control of levers of speech, trying to come in and say, okay, this is correct, this is incorrect, you know, all of you Trump supporters are just wrong. That only exacerbates division a lot of times, and we can cocoon ourselves into conversations that are high-minded, but aren't necessarily having any influence or effect on broad numbers of people who are putting information and noise into the system. But how do we bring sanity into that, you know, into that space?
This is such an important question, and to be honest, I think it's going to be one of our biggest challenges, not just right now, but in the years to come. But may I share with you, I come from a country, from Turkey, that has lost even this, little democracy that we had, the potential of democracy, and we've been going backwards, sliding into ultranationalism, Islamism, authoritarianism, and when all of that happens, I think we will see an increase in sexism, homophobia, misogyny as well. They always go hand in hand. The reason I mentioned Turkey is because wherever in the world you see a rise in populist authoritarianism, it is not a coincidence that demagogues love to create and stoke further tension. They benefit from polarization. The more divided we are into angry camps, the more the demagogue benefits from that. So our challenge is, how do we overcome these divisions? I think we should be very critical, openly critical of all kinds of racism, sexism, discrimination, and all kinds of populist demagoguery. At the same time, try to understand why people might have voted in different ways. Why? As a storyteller, for me, this is very important, to try to put yourself in the shoes of another person. I'm very critical of Brexit. I also know that had I been born in a different part of this country, into a different family, under different circumstances, I might have voted for Brexit. So I can't lose sight of that. I will be very critical of people who are exploiting, that tide of isolationism that we've seen in the UK, but continue to connect with people who come from different backgrounds. We need to do that, because otherwise, when we're so polarized, that tension creates an atmosphere that actually harms pluralistic democracy even further, which benefits the demagogues even more.
This is so powerful, Elif, because part of what you're talking about, right, is having humility and empathy without turning into a softie or a snowflake. You know, you're talking about being able to hear why people supported Brexit and try to put yourself in their shoes rather than sitting in your political corner and judging and dismissing them. There were so many Americans after Donald Trump was elected on the left who said, I don't want to read any more stories about Trump supporters. The only thing I want to hear from a Trump supporter is I was wrong. And that was it. They didn't want to hear anything else. They just wanted to, to banish these people. And last May, I did a focus group with a group of Trump supporters around the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder, talking about race in America, because a year earlier, there was an extraordinary surge in support of Black Lives Matter among conservatives and Trump supporters. And I wanted to understand in ways in which that was sustained and ways in which that fell off, because it was very surprising. And the amount of feedback I got was so divided. Some people thought these were voices that were worth hearing. These were sort of average people who might have supported Brexit had they lived in Britain, people who clearly supported Trump in America. But then the hostility among so many New York Times subscribers to, why are you bringing us these people anymore? Stop, get rid of it. And I just want to go back to that core point you just were making. I mean, how do we live and engage with people? They may be members of our family, they may be members of our community, who are so different from us politically, education backgrounds, all kind of backgrounds. in a way that is productive or useful? Or is it just, we're fact checking and truth squatting each other constantly? How do we take that into a saner place?
Indeed. Just to make it clear, I'm not talking about the elite of that populist movement, because they like to claim that there's a liberal elite versus the people, and they represent the people. I think there are different types of elite, and there is a very populist, right-wing, nationalistic elite, as we've seen in Turkey, in Brazil, in America, and in country after country. So that's not what I'm talking about. But as you said, I'm talking about our maybe families, relatives, people have been falling apart over dinners. I've seen this in the UK as well. How do we communicate? How do we try to understand? And I think that part is worth the effort, because human beings are very complex. We all come in, we all contain multitudes, like Walt Whitman used to say. Maybe if I may give you an example, as a novelist in Turkey, I have many readers who come from all kinds of backgrounds, and many of them are actually quite conservative. If you ask their opinions about Armenians, Jews, Greeks, Kurds, Alevis, they will tell you all kinds of stereotypes, because this is the only narrative they have heard at school, in the family, in their neighborhood. Equally, I have many readers who are quite homophobic and transphobic. Again, this is the only narrative they have heard. But then the same people, sometimes they come and they say, I've read your novel, and this is the character that I love the most. And they get upset at me and they say, why didn't you give that character a happier ending? And then I realized the fictional character they're talking about is Armenian or Greek or Jewish or Kurdish or gay or bisexual. So it's a question that I've been asking myself for so long. How is it possible that people who are so rigid in their mindset, judgmental, xenophobic, within a collective identity, when they are alone, when they become an individual, because that's what happens when we read a novel, we retreat into an inner garden. We're not part of a collectivity anymore. We're just ourselves. In that moment of loneliness, there's a potential. You are a bit more ready to connect with your other, and to realize actually the other is my brother, the other is my sister. I am the other. So all I'm saying is, we cannot lose those bridges. And for that, we need art, we need literature, we need storytelling. If we cut these off completely, the society that we're left with is just divided into angry echo chambers, which eventually benefits populism and populist authoritarianism.
Oh, Elif, I'm loving this conversation. I wish you were here with us next year. Elif, I want to ask you a question related to what you were just talking about. And it's a personal question for me, and I want to not botch it. When I was growing up, I grew up in a very homophobic family, in a pretty homophobic Irish Catholic community in Boston. And when I came out as gay, there were very few people in my family or in my kind of larger network who really knew a gay person. And I saw over the last 10, 15 years, I think a very genuine change among a not small number of people who became, you can call it tolerant, accepting, maybe a little more open-minded, a little more curious, a little less afraid. And that narrative is pretty familiar in America, certainly now. If you know a person who's LGBTQ, your mind may become more open. There's less fear. And I wonder, and this is where it gets more complicated, if there is some kind of an equivalent in our political space anymore. We're so divided, we're so tribalistic, but is there really any potential for, if we live among each other, as you were saying, or if we can, sit beside each other and have conversations? I mean, is it possible, just through, in a way, kind of a sense of shared humanity or osmosis, that we can become a little less tribal with each other, that we can, I'm trying to think of sitting with a Trump supporter and feeling more open and tolerant to some of their views. I don't know if that's possible. And maybe I'm talking about a personal experience and a political experience that are not, that don't, easily gel. But I am wondering what you think about the degree to which sanity can come about by talking more, not less, with each other, if we have the tolerance to do that.
Yeah, I really appreciate, your words, and like you, Ireland especially gives me hope, because the change, the social
Yeah.
transformation, both with regards to LGBTQ plus rights, but also abortion, these were issues that were unthinkable not that long ago, like a few decades ago, and the society has achieved that very genuine transformation, mostly thanks to what you said, because when we know people who are coming from various backgrounds, then this fear disappears faster. But I think the crucial thing is, maybe we need to become a bit better listeners, and we've also forgotten to listen. We've also forgotten to say I don't know. I mean, you can ask me anything you want. If I don't know the answer, I can Google it in the next 5 minutes. I will tell you a few words, giving me the illusion that I know something about the subject. When was the last time we ever said, I don't know, to anyone? We do say, I don't know, if children ask us complex questions about, death and God and philosophy, and they do ask challenging questions. But among adults, we don't say, I don't know anymore. So I do make a distinction between information, knowledge, and wisdom. I think we're living in an age in which we're bombarded with information. And the truth is, we don't absorb it, we don't process it, and we can't deal with this much information. Our brains are not wired like that, let alone misinformation. So, too much information, but very little knowledge and even less wisdom. Can we change that ratio? Can we focus more on knowledge? For knowledge, we need to slow down. You can't rush knowledge. We need to go into an inner garden. We need books, investigative journalism. I have a lot of respect for in-depth analysis and investigative journalism that goes into the heart of the story, not snippets of information. And ultimately, we need wisdom. For that, we need to bring the mind and the heart together, a bit more compassion. So we don't hear this kind of language in realpolitik. And that troubles me. Not to forget that we are human beings, we're all on a journey, and we do change. And there's always room for change, both for societies, also for individuals.
I so agree. We become a society of people who make assumptions and jump to conclusions so much. I was a political analyst on CNN for years, and if you go on CNN and Anderson Cooper or Chris Cuomo or Aaron Burnett is asking you a question live, you can't say I don't know. You can't. Whether it's Twitter, whether it's cable news, so many of the spaces that we work within, you are expected now to have an answer right away or be able to give a judgment. And sometimes it can be glib and unfortunate. Sometimes you do know certainly what you're talking about. It can be informed and useful. But we become, as a society, no matter what your expertise level, conditioned to just having an opinion and just putting your opinion out there as if this is how the world will benefit, by hearing it over and over again. And we're seeing it now, if I can pivot a little bit to the pandemic. We've had the intensity of the climate change crisis and that affecting our sanity, the challenges to democracy that we've spent several days, here talking about, and that affects our sanity, and then the pandemic, and just again the assumptions and the jumping to conclusions that people have made, around this, as well. And I'm wondering how you see us kind of coming through and eventually out of the pandemic. What concerns you, but also what gives you hope or optimism about how we're handling that?
Yeah, it is such a crucial crossroads, isn't it? I think when people ask, again, with good intentions, when are we going to go back to the normal? We're not going back, that old world is gone. I love that saying by Gramsci when he says, the old world is gone, the new world is not born yet, and we are in the middle. That threshold moment is incredibly scary because it's full of uncertainty, and the ground beneath our feet doesn't feel solid anymore. But I think at a moment like this, we need to understand we have to rethink. It's a moment of reckoning. restructure our values, priorities. What kind of a future, what kind of a world do we want? Is it more money, more greed, more, even when it's not corporate greed, some kind of rush, we're always rushing from one appointment to the other? Or is it actually those immaterial things the pandemic has shown us that really matter more, like family, like love, like sisterhood, like humanism, or just the sheer luxury of sitting under a tree reading a book? Reconnect with nature, realize that we're not owners of this planet, we're just part of the ecosystem. A bit more humility and sense of connectivity. I find it incredibly disappointing that at the moment when we need international solidarity the most, where we ended up is vaccine nationalism. At a time when we have so many global challenges, whether it's the possibility of another pandemic, whether it's ecological crisis, cyber terrorism, everything shows us that we are interconnected. We can't answer these global challenges with the forces of nationalism or tribalism. But if I may come back to this question of sanity, I think it's actually okay, not to be okay at a moment like this. I have a positive view on pessimism. Sometimes I jokingly think maybe it's because I'm Turkish, it's in my DNA. As you look at a map of Europe, you trace the river Danube from Germany towards the Black Sea, the level of optimism drops as you move eastward. But what I'm trying to say is, what we need perhaps is a combination of, some kind of pessimism and optimism, because we need pessimism to understand what is at stake. We need to understand that history doesn't necessarily always go forward. Sometimes countries slide backwards. And when that happens, the first thing that will be taken away will be women's rights and minority rights. So as women, as LGBTQ+, as minorities, we have to become bigger, more passionate defenders of democracy. We have more to lose. But with regards to emotions, I think if from time to time we don't find ourselves angry or anxious or frustrated, maybe we're not really following what's happening in the world. When we do follow, of course, it affects us. The question is, what do we do with these negative emotions? Can we turn them into something more positive, constructive, see it as a source of energy? There's only one emotion that scares me, and that is the lack of all emotions, which is numbness. The moment we become disconnected, indifferent, the moment we stop caring, if enough number of people become numb, I think that will be a much harder and difficult world to live in.
We have about 10 minutes or so left, and I just want to open it up to the room for any questions for Elif. We have a microphone if folks want to ask a question. I certainly have more, but yes, Dawn. Yeah.
Hi, Elif. It's Dawn from Bergruin. How are you? It's good to see you. I just wanted to ask, I think what's so remarkable about you is you're able to see the world and reflect on the world so clearly, and yet you keep such an open heart. How do you stay such an open-hearted person when, you deliberately it feels to me like you keep yourself deliberately sensitive, and I wonder how you do that.
Wow, it's first of all lovely to see you, and what an interesting question. I don't know if this is something I deliberately do, and as I said, I'm not a very optimistic person, but I am aware that too much pessimism pulls us down, and it does lead to apathy, because if nothing is going to change, why bother, right? And this sense of helplessness is so self-destructive, because climate change is so big. What can I do as an individual? Yes, tech monopolies are so big. What can I, do? Whatever I write, is it going to make a difference? So the moment we start seeing ourselves as very small vis-a-vis these massive issues that we're talking about, then we lose any sense of desire to become engaged. I love reading, and I love reading multidisciplinary, in an interdisciplinary way. And sometimes when readers, it's usually male readers who do this, they say, I want to understand what's happening in the world, so I read finance, politics, history, philosophy. I don't have time for fiction. My wife reads fiction. My girlfriend reads fiction. I feel very sad when I hear this, because I think inside the world of fiction, there is everything. There is philosophy, there is history, psychology, technology, but most importantly, perhaps there's emotional intelligence. And this is something that I really believe in. I don't know a single human being in this world, whether we're dentists, designers, students, teachers, who doesn't need emotional intelligence and empathy. So these are the things that I want to nourish and cultivate. And for that, I think we need the art of storytelling.
Other questions? Yes.
Hi, I'm George. You know, you see me. I'm Greek, and I must say, first of all, that listen to you. I didn't know of you. I didn't know your books. I have fallen in love with you platonically, of course, but I'm sure that many Greeks will see a sister there. You know, because what you are saying is exactly, you know, the way we feel, the way we are. The second point is, I would like to point. It's surprising, and not in a nice, you know, in a positive way, that the two American people who spoke, you know, you and the lady, they were actually surprised with what you were saying, because I think what you said is so natural that this is how it should be, and I'm worried that you were surprised that this is how it should have been, and another point is, I think it is very important for writers, authors who write books, to write stories, I don't know if you do, which make, you know, somebody, the hero, to be, people to love the hero, people who have a different view, and then through the book, make them to start seeing a different, you know, something that the hero says, which is different from what they believed originally. I think this is the best way of these other people, because we're educated and all that, to come closer to that. People in Turkey and in Greece and in Italy will have to feel sympathy, you know, empathy for, you know, for somebody. And it's, I mean, if you think what Dostoevsky did, how this thing, all these people did, how this thing worked. So
Okay.
From my point of view, thank you very much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any questions? Yes, please.
Thank you. Good morning. I would like to go back to literature a bit. As you said in the beginning of this discussion, you wrote your latest book during 2020, even though authors, as you said, usually write in retrospect of things that happen. Would you say that this is like a change in the role of writers and authors due to COVID? That has the pandemic made you and maybe authors in general, you know, more concentrated in what is going on right now? Thank you.
Thanks so much. Shall I answer, or shall I wait?
Oh, yes, please.
Yeah. I find that actually that change, there is a change in my opinion, and I find it very significant. I think authors who come from wounded democracies like Turkey, like Brazil, the list is so long, to be honest, and that list is getting longer. We never had the luxury of being apolitical. You know, when so much is happening outside the window, you can't say, I only want to talk about my fiction, don't ask me anything else. You do have to think about politics. Also, I am a feminist, and one of the many wonderful things that I've learned from past feminist movements, generations, is that politics is not only about what Boris Johnson said today or what political parties are doing. It's much more than that, more diffused. Wherever there's power imbalance, there's politics. So the personal is also political. You might be writing about sexuality, gender, that too is quite political. So what I'm trying to say is, I am aware that there is politics inside literature, but also I think minority authors in the Western world are very much aware of this. And especially in America, I follow lots of Asian American authors who have been very vocal in their criticism of this anti-Asian hatred that has been stoked by right-wing populism in America. And these authors have been very critical, very vocal, you know, they organizing their voices, which is very important. So both minority authors and non-Western authors, I think we're aware that there's an urgency to politics that you have to engage with. But when I say this, I'm not talking about party politics. I'm definitely not talking about partisan politics. I'm talking about core issues that keep democracy alive, such as rule of law, separation of powers, freedom of media, independence of academia, women's rights, LGBTQ+ rights. On these issues and minority rights, we cannot be silent or apolitical. So I do see that kind of shift and writers becoming more engaged. If I may also say a few words about the previous listener, I really appreciate your words, you know, and coming from a Greek person, this really means a lot to me, because we were raised in such a way that we were taught to hate each other, and we won't do that. And we do know that, you know, there's something that is much stronger than hatred, and that thing won't disappear. So this communication is very important to me. Of course, I am Turkish. I'm very attached to Istanbul. Anyone who reads my work can see that there's an emotional connection there. And I will always carry Istanbul with me, even when I can't go back. But I equally feel attached to the Balkans. So put me next to a Greek author, Bulgarian author, Romanian author. I have so much in common. I feel attached to the Levant, the Mediterranean. I have elements in my soul from the Middle East that I will always carry with me. I do consider myself European, the values I share. Over the years, I became a Londoner, a British citizen. And despite what politicians have been telling us in the UK because of this Brexit saga, I want to call myself a citizen of the world, a citizen of humankind. That doesn't mean, as Theresa May said, you're a citizen of nowhere. I don't think it means that. It means you have multiple belongings. We all have multiple belongings. The problem is we're living in a world that doesn't allow us to celebrate our own multiplicity. And that's the thing we need to criticize. So rather than monolithic identities, I think fluid, multiple belongings can change the narrative.
Another question? Yes.
Good morning. Thank you very much. I have a very brief question. Where do you see Turkey going? Will it? Do you believe it will keep sliding away from the Western democratic world? Or do you have any forecasts, predictions about where the country is going?
You know, how I wish I could tell you that we have made progress. How I wish I could say that civil society is very strong in Turkey. But the truth is, after so many years of populist authoritarianism, the institutions are broken, you know? That's the thing, democratic institutions, because otherwise demagogues come and go. But what happens to democratic institutions, democratic norms, and the language of politics, if that is broken, that takes much longer to fix, to heal. So as you know, Turkey has been going backwards, first gradually, but then with a bewildering speed, sliding more and more into more ultranationalism, more Islamism, populism, and authoritarianism. And unfortunately became the world's leading jailer of journalists, surpassing even Russia's records, China's records. So it's a difficult place for people who deal with words, like writers or journalists, poets. Journalism has become a very difficult profession, no doubt, but also cartoonists. You know, humor is a dangerous thing where there's authoritarianism. However, when I say all this, I wouldn't want you to forget that there are so many people in Turkey, because it's such a complicated country. There are so many people, like women, especially youth, minorities, who are vocal, who believe in democracy, who want to build a better future, and they also exist. Maybe we don't hear their voices, but they are there. So personally, when I look at Turkey's politics and politicians, I feel very depressed. But when I look at the people, when I connect with people, listen to people, see their resilience, you know, especially please focus on women, youth, and minorities, then you will feel much more hope and a bit more optimism, definitely. So let us not lose sight of the society, and let us not lose sight of that fact that government and society are not the same thing.
Elif, I think we have time for just one more question. If anyone has a final question for us. Yes.
Hello, and thank you very much. It was extremely inspiring, and we hope next year you will be live with us. My question, we went from the IQ era to the EQ era, as you also mentioned. Some say now we are in the LQ era, which is love intelligence, but at the same time, we are in the artificial intelligence era. So is this the battle that we're going to face?
What a beautiful question. This is a battle that we're going to face. Also, what worries me is that technology changes so fast, and we are yet to understand the complexity and where it's taking us. And when I say we, I don't believe nobody's an ordinary citizen, but this distinction. When I say we, I also include the Silicon Valley in it. When you read, lots of books have been written about the journey of Facebook, for instance, people didn't realize what they had generated, It is not enough to say, okay, this is a platform, everyone can write whatever they want, it's just freedom of speech. You don't realize that same platform is used for genocide in Myanmar. They don't realize that same platform is used in many parts of the world to auction women and girls to the highest bidders. There are lots of problems that those platforms are causing, but even the inventors are not realizing what it's going to lead to. So all I'm trying to say is technology is moving very fast, and rules and regulations and the debates that we're having are very much lagging behind, and that gap is widening. How do we move forward? I think we need to become more active digital citizens. None of us has the luxury anymore to become disconnected from what's going on. We have to become more engaged, more involved citizens, both in the digital space, but also the public space. Keep an eye on misinformation, the spread of slander, hate speech, and try to democratize our digital spaces. We have to initiate these campaigns as world citizens ourselves. To me, reading Hannah Arendt is incredibly important. And the danger that she always comes back to, talks about, is this apathy, and when we become atomized individuals, when we lose this sense of connection. So there's that part with regards to AI and technology that really scares me, that it makes us more and more atomized, and we have to become more involved in these digital discussions. We shouldn't say, well, I don't know this subject, tech people know it. Tech people don't know what they're doing either. We need more interdisciplinary conversations, and I think as citizens, we need to raise our voices, and especially women and minorities need to be in this debate, in this public space and digital space.
Elif, you've given us so much to think about. This has been such a valuable conversation, and I endorse your point about reading more fiction and reading more novels and reading interdisciplinary around. Elif, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm so thankful, and hopefully next year in person we'll see each other. Thank you. Thank you so much.